My name is Thomas Hartmann. I joined Trolltech in 2006 and I work in the Berlin office. So the Berlin office is all about tooling and I'm currently leading the project Qt Quick Designer. Before I start with the presentation, I would like to ask who of you has tried the Qt Quick Designer already? Okay, there are a couple of people, but most people are completely beginners. Okay. That's good to know. Another remark, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and to interrupt me and ask questions. I mean, I know the tool inside out and I will do some demonstrations. If I'm too fast, just interrupt me, ask your questions. That's no problem. Okay. First, I want to give you a short agenda. I will talk a little bit about the history and the motivation for the team, for the tool. This also reflects, of course, the outcome. Then I will do a demonstrations of several workflows, the basics, functionalities, a little bit about Symbian, and a little bit bigger stuff. I also will dive into some deeper topics. And then in the very end, but that's very short, I will brush some technical topics about the Qt Quick Designer. Yeah, the project was initially called Bauhaus and started in 2009 as a next generation UI designer. So there was no QML and no Qt Quick back then. This maybe still shows a little bit in the application. So it's older than QML. So we basically started with what's good about the old designer, you know, the QWidget designer, what could be improved, and so on. Started to do some brainstorming, and at some point Qt Quick came in, or QML, and then it was more clear what we have to do. Yeah, about Bauhaus, I mean, this is basically some school of architecture which is very prominent in Berlin. It's like Gropius, somebody might heard here. So that's why we basically choose the name. I mean, and this is just some picture I found on the internet, which I rebuilt with our designer. So just to show off a little bit. And yeah, some other topic, or also from architecture, has probably everybody who does the UI design has heard that, is form follows function. It is basically, yeah, you can read that. It is a pervading law of all things organic and inorganic, of all things physical and metaphysical, of all things human and all things superhuman, of all true manifestations of the head, of the heart, of the soul, that is alive, is recognizable in the expression that form ever follows function. Louis Sullivan was an architect. Yeah, this is, I mean, what we had basically when we gathered some team and did some brainstorming, talked a little bit about some like very rough abstract ideas. So let's get a little bit more concrete. This is how the designer looks today. So it's pretty classical design. You have an item library on the left, a navigator for all the items. You have a property editor on the right, form editor in the middle, states editor on top. And typically, you can always in Creator, you can reorganize things to some degree. So if you want, you can have a property editor also on the left. But that's my setup. And yeah, so yeah, I already talked a little bit about that. When we knew that QML is a thing we have to design, we quickly found out that this standard approach of loading and saving a file won't work. So QML is it's a declarative programming language. People do heavily modify it in a text and a code editor. So we just cannot take the file, load it, and then do stuff with it, and then save it again. Because we will destroy parts of the file, destroy formatting. People will get annoyed. So what we basically decided was that we rewrite the QML document. Rewriting basically means that the Qt Quick Designer works on the text, basically directly. So if you change a property, like some position from 9 to 10, the only thing the Qt Quick Designer touches is this number. The rest of the file is completely taken as is, completely intact. And that basically means we have an extremely high integration with the text editor and vice versa. So if you do changes in the text editor, you have them directly in the visual mode and vice versa. Yeah. Consequently, the Qt Quick Designer concentrates on visual aspects. That was another design decision we made. Basically, that means there's always a text editor, it's always a fallback, And we don't have to do everything visually, like, for example, defining control flows. You can do that in the text editor. I mean, it is a programming language, and for example, if you want to define what this button does, you can do that in the text editor. You don't have to click through dialogues and define it in a dialogue. Yeah, that's just a small picture. So you have the text editor of Qt Creator, you have the designer, they are basically round-tripping, you have this tight integration, and we also have this, what we call the emulation layer. But yeah, that's something for later. Yeah. Another very important topic is that the Qt Quick Designer only works on the declarative parts of QML. So QML is a declarative language, but of course you can have JavaScript inside. So that means we will evaluate bindings. We do that, but we will not evaluate imperative code. Like for you who really know QML, you can call code in onCompleted. You can do arbitrary stuff even in bindings. You can put expressions there or statements. We ignore these. We only keep to the declarative parts. I mean, that's basically the limitation we have to do because there's no way that our tool can properly understand the semantics of imperative code. I mean, we would get nowhere, right? We would always problems, right? The declarative part we can understand pretty well, and that way we can basically have very good tooling. So now we'll start with a demonstration. So first, some very basic stuff. So I start here with some text. You see it's basic QML, just an import, just a rectangle. Now I go to the design mode. And then I have the blank, boring, white rectangle. So what I can do now is, I have the item library. I can drag in a rectangle, another boring white rectangle. I resize it, change the color to red. Now I have a red rectangle, right? That's trivial. I can even copy the rectangle, of course, change the gradient. I have a rectangle with a gradient. This is just super basic features. Now I can select them, for example. Let's go to layout, layout in a grid. Now I have this item in a grid. And now I can, for example, change the spacing of the grid. That's it. And if I go to the text, I have basically the text. And I can, for example, go here and change this color to gray. Go back. Now I have a gray rectangle. No magic. Yeah. One other really, really important aspect is states. So I can easily add another state. But I will first make this example slightly more trivial again. Just one rectangle, red color. I add a state. Now I have two states. Of course, the rectangle is blue in both states. That's boring. Now I can change the color in state 1, right? I change it to red. And I can also, for example, change the size a little bit. So I have two states, different size. And now there's something that's a little bit different from other UI editors, that we highlight every property that is explicitly set. So we are in state 1, and the width and the height is implicitly set. That's why it's blue here. Right? All the other properties, but the color, are not explicitly set. They have just implicit value from the component and from the base state, so we don't basically highlight them in blue. This is important because, I mean, you basically have to know what a state changes, right? And to keep track of it, and it makes it easier to spot what is actually changed in that state, and that's always the stuff highlighted in blue. So, okay. Now let's go a little bit to the limitations. I go back to the text editor. Now, as I already told, I can add arbitrary JavaScript code here. So, and I say something like color is blue, right? This will not be reflected in the visual editor now, so we won't see any green color, right? This is different from the preview. Which should come now. Did I do a typo? Green is not a proper color. Yeah, of course. This is JavaScript. Right now it's green, but that's not reflected in the visual editor. And I mean, this is trivial. We could track this case, but it can be arbitrarily complex, and there's no way for us to keep track of these changes, and that's why we basically draw this line and say, no, imperative code like that, game over for the designer. But other stuff works. For example, we could do something like, we can do this. We have a rectangle, drag it here, resize it, make it red, and then we have width, set expression, and then we say parent.width divided by 2. That works, no problem, right? It's an expression, we mark it as expression, but it works. You have the proper width here, you can still move it around, right? You cannot resize it anymore in the width, because usually you set this expression, that's more important than just the value, so we just don't override it by default, but it works, so we have a nice preview. Okay. Then another of the basic features is, of course, anchors. So I have a text here, and then another rectangle. And then I can take this text, go to layout, and anchor it. By default, it's anchored to the parent, but I also can anchor it to the rectangle. Let's say 20 here. If I move the rectangle around, the text moves accordingly. So layouting stuff, that's basically what the designer is for, right? That's what we make easy, and that's what we have to make easy. So now let's go to slightly more complex things. Let's see a little bit about Symbian. Wait. So I have now another file which also imports Symbian 1.1. And go to the design mode, and then we automatically, because there is this special import, show more items in the item library specific to Symbian. And then, yeah, you can just drag them in. So let's build a very small example. Status bar. We have a status bar here. We drag in a switch. We lay out the switch somehow. You drag in a slider. Right. Some text area. Resize the text editor, the text area, and so on. For example, I could now anchor this to the parent, give it some sensible margins. And yeah, this also shows a little bit one limitations, because there is no definite component set for Qt Quick. We just now don't provide any support for any specific component set. So of course we support the Symbian components, but we support not all the arbitrary magic that might be there, right? So for example, if you want to have layout orientation changes, right now what we propose is that you emulate it. So we have this, on the formatter on the top, we have basically this, the possibility to override the width. So I set it to, that's a little bit big, 600, and now I see what will happen if the thing resizes, right? So we didn't introduce a special orientation thingy somewhere just for these Symbian components. Instead, we keep it a little bit more flexible. You can just define arbitrary sizes up there, which will be not reflected in the document. You can also remove them afterwards again. And they're gone. They have the default size again. This is basically one limitation we just have to make, because these components are moving so fast. There's not really one definite component set for Qt Quick. There's also Migo, there are the desktop components. So we basically just say we keep it quite generic. So of course you can, that's another nice feature. You can reparent things here and make all nice stuff, but there is no specific things for like these orientation changes or for other deeper things in the component framework yet. Okay, with the selection list item. Okay, so let's move on a little bit forward. I have prepared another little bit more extensive example. So do not save. Right. So, and what I did is I created my own components, my own component set, which I call sketch, which are components I did, and basically which represent some sketching style. So some styles you could use for mockups. So I will just frame fold. Probably see now. I have drag in some button, and this looks like a sketch. So this is nice for prototyping, and this is not a really cute feature. I just did that for this presentation. So I have my own component set, and I want to show a little bit how easily they integrate. So how easy it is basically to create your own components and to integrate them into the editor. So the only thing I basically did is I created all these components, put them into my project, then they automatically show up here. These are pure Qt Quick components, by the way. So I only use Qt Quick to define them. And yeah, from then on, it's basically no magic. They just work. We auto-generate the property editor here for the properties you define on the components. So if you go into button, a short look at button, then you see that I expose this property text up here, right? And if you go back to my sketch, then you see we have a property text here, and we have a property margin, and we have properties we derive from the border image, because button is also a border image. So even more advanced stuff works. So I have, for example, tab widget. I drag in a tab widget, which is empty by default, and then I create a tab and another tab. So I have now 2 items in the tab widget, and it automatically creates the tabs. But I also want to demonstrate a little bit where the limitations are. There's one limitation that I defined basically the interface that to define the caption. You cannot do right now any direct manipulation or anything, because that's a custom component set. The designer doesn't know anything about them, right? And to basically define now the title, you have to go to the property editor, do property title, string title test. And we go back and we have the proper caption there. But that's one of the limitations, right? The designer doesn't know the components, so doesn't know how this caption mechanism works. It's this kind of special usage of a property, so it cannot know it. So we have to do it by hand in the text editor. Another more advanced feature, or I want to talk about here, is when implementing the tab widget. What we often see is that some components don't work in the Qt Quick designer. And usually the reason is pretty simple. In QML, you usually start your application, then maybe you do some setup stuff and complete it, and then everything is ready. Like, for example, populating the tab widget just happens once on startup, right? And because in the designer we work dynamically and things are reparent, moved around, deleted, if you just implement, here's this function set opacities, which is the setup work for this tab widget component. And typically what we often see is that it's not implemented on content change. That's a little bit deeper into the QML language, but so it's only implemented on onCompleted. That will mean that it will only work if the tab widget is populated once and then running forever, which is not the case for the QML designer. So basically the only thing you have to do fix to get it working in the designer is to basically say this. So whenever the children changes, the tab changes, also do your setup work, right? And then from then on, it works in the designer. So let's play around a little bit more. Just have this nice button here. Whoop, whoop. Let me delete it. It's boring. Okay. then we create some form, label, name. Then we create some line edit. Now we would basically what the layouting features, right? So we call this has to have an ID, right? We gave it the ID name, label, so we can find it or identify it easier. And then we anchor for this to the name label on the right to the parent. Right, and now if you, for example, press play, you already see that we have some resizing behavior for this. And also here, you would probably anchor it like that. Yeah, and then you can build your forms that you're used to, right? Like you're used to any other tool, and whatever you want to do in QML, you can do it here. If there is something we don't understand, we don't touch it, right? If you put lots of code here, transitions, animations, do it, no problem for the designer. We just ignore it. But I mean, defining states, all this kind of stuff works, right? So if we now want to have another state, okay. Right, let's see what we could do here. Button, then we have another button. You move it here, and then you have the state where we, for example, hide this button. So we set the visibility to false, and this other button is only visible in this state. And we give it some caption, like back. Right, now we have two states, which define some behavior of your application. No problem, we can now I'll do any arbitrary change here. Okay, let's just move this down and add another frame. This is a component. So, and because I dragged them in that state, they are now only visible in that state. And if I want to add some functionality, let's see, I just select this button, go to edit mode, and then I basically add the functionality. So on clicked root.state equals state 1. Right. Tippfehler. Ah, yeah, thank you. But it's not. There should be a red underline. It's not my fault. Yeah, that's actually interesting. Boah. Okay, I have it. Now I have this back button. We go back to the base state. And then we play it, check if it works. Button, you have this other state back. Right, and of course you can do what you want, right? This could be a Symbian application form, and we could do the same stuff for Symbian application, right? Defining workflows and what we now basically research a little bit is basically just researching on pure QML mockups and then adding functionality later, which this helps basically iterating the UI really fast because you just do not care really about the backend. But then when the developer comes in and has to do the backend, has to integrate it, it's still QML, right? You do not change technology. I mean, if you, for example, do the mockup and the UI iterations in HTML, or there are lots of other tools, Flash, then suddenly you have to switch technology, and this really hurts because there might things that work flawlessly in Flash, but you have some problems in QML, or it's just a little bit different. Here's a pixel suddenly off, and this kind of stuff, right? And then you have to drag in the developer again, fix that. That's not the case, right? It's QML all the way, right? You start doing your mockups, your designs in QML, and then it goes directly into the application. I can show a little bit more. For example, we have our welcome screen. This is the welcome screen of Qt Creator. This is done in QML. Now we see it in the design mode. We don't see much here because there's some legacy. So this is heavily driven by C++. So it's game over for the editor because basically all this is populated by C++. But this is pure QML, and so it can be edited, right? So we can just go inside here. We have this nice crumble bar up here. You select this. Remove the layouts. Right. Okay, then it's small. Now we can move it around. Of course, something moves with it. So now I fight a little bit with a small screen, but we can also zoom a little bit. We can also remove the layouts here. Okay. Well. Now I destroyed it. Let's use undo. Okay. So for example, I'll give it, what could we do? A different text color, right? Now we go back here. Now we have it in red. So we can work here, right? Do changes, and yeah, I can even show that on some of the examples that are part of Qt. So where did I hide them? For example, the Twitter example, that's a standard example that comes with Qt. So this is a Twitter example. And now we have this toolbar here. We have this, that's F2, like in the rest of Creator, go to into component. Now we go into that component. We can do that once more. Now we have this grumble bar thingy. And now let's, for example, change the text size a little bit. And then we go back to the thing here, and then we have the whole thing. And you can interactively edit it as you want. You could exchange the icons, you could exchange the border image, completely adjust the look and feel of that thing. And I think that's what the visual editor is for, right? It's not for to define basically the interaction of buttons and states. It's to define the visual aspects of your application. And there's another thing I want to show. No. That's also an important feature. Example application, which does a contact list. It's just a very simple contact list, but by default or in the application, this data is driven by C++. So you wouldn't see anything in the designer. You wouldn't see anything if you just run it here, because without the C++ backend, it's just not possible to get the data, right? It's coming from the web or from some SQL database. And that's why we invented this concept of dummy models. So what you can do is, in your project, you have a directory called dummy data, and then we put a contact model, and this is basically the fallback model. So if they're in the designer, we don't use the model from the database or from the C++ backend, we just use this predefined model. And yeah, I mean, there are sometimes presentations, for example, where you show some Flickr demo and suddenly you have the women with not much clothes, right? This can happen, and it's not usually very good if you do a presentation to management, and then this kind of stuff comes really handy, also for normal presentations. So it's also a feature for Qt, but it's also very important for the designer, right? Because if I want to design anything on this contact application, then I need that. I need to have the data, right? Okay. Now the text editor crashed. It's not the designer. I don't know what's going on here. Yeah. So this was basically already the slide where I explained this a little bit. I won't get in these file name details, but basically what you have is some dummy model with the ID dummy data, and then you have this dummy data with the ID data model, and then you have this file here. It's the same file name as the ID. Define your model there, and then you're ready to go. You have all the data also in the designer, or this backup data. Yeah, I also showed that. Okay, then question I hear really, really often, how do I get my own components into Qt Quick Designer? I already showed that basically, if it's pure QML, it's basically working like in the sketch demo I already showed. You just put them into your project, and from then on it works fine. For C++, it's a little bit more complicated because, yeah, we have to execute the C++ plugin somewhere, right? And with C++, you always have the problem that the ABI is not properly defined, even between compilers from the same vendor and blah. And Qt Creator and Qt Quick Designer is built with one compiler, with one Qt version, and most of you probably don't build it yourself. So we invented this concept of QML Puppet, which means that all the rendering and all the emulation is done in a separate process. That process we call QML Puppet. And this QML Puppet can be built for any Qt. And that basically means that for every Qt where QML Puppet is built for, we can take it up and load plugins for this Qt version. Yeah, another interesting topic is how can I extend Qt Quick Designer easily? By that I do not mean contributing code or redesigning the product, but just very simple things. For example, how do I populate the item library with my own components if I have specific C++ set of components? And yeah, the item library is driven by plugins. I will show that. And yeah, it basically comes down to writing a little bit of QML, providing some icons, and there you go. Then the property editor is written in QML. That means it's also quite easy to extend the property editor for your own needs. So if you have special types and you don't like the auto-generated property editor, because yeah, an auto-generated one is never as good as a tailored one to my needs, right? So the ordering might be like a little bit off, or if you even want to get special widget in there, even that is possible to some degree. The property editor is done in QML. You can write your own QML files that define the parts of the property editor for your use case. So just show that shortly for the item library. The main part is done in some XML file, where you basically define, I have a Qt component, in this case a QDesktop.button. That's Qt Desktop is the import, and button is the name of the component. I provide some icon. I provide a category, of course. It has to be in some category. I provide a bigger icon for the item library. There's a required import, so it only shows off in the item library if I have this import. And then, yeah, there's a certain width and a certain height, some default values. If you drag it in, it gets these default values. That's basically all you have to do. Then, I mean, we have a lot of plugins already there for Qt Quick, even for Qt Desktop. It's part of Qt Creator, so we can have a look how they look. But it's basically this XML plus the resources you see here, and then that's a special plugin. And if that's loaded, the items are in your library. And for the property editor, it's yeah, that's a very interesting thing. When we started with the property editor, we wanted to do in QML. But back then, there were no desktop items for QML. So no spinbox, no sliders, nothing. All the desktop stuff was missing. So we decided, okay, we use QML because we want to test that technology, but we will use it on pure QWidget. So that's actually possible. That's what you see here. So you can actually drive the normal QWidgets that you know from QML, and that's what we do in the property editor. And this is basically how it looks. And by naming giving the component the name, basically of the type you want to change, you can do anything here. You define some backend, you see that here. So I won't want to get into the details here, but that's pretty easy to pick up from the examples we wrote. But the interesting thing is that this is really like Qt how you know it, right? We have a QWidget, we have a layout, a QVBox layout, which is really the old layout from QWidget, and then you go. This is not a technology we support officially, but I think it's interesting to know that this works and this can be done. Yeah, another story is, yeah, you heard that often from our managers, is dog fooding. I call it not dog fooding, I could just call it dog food. Yeah, when we did the designer, we tested QML heavily. So that means, I already told about that, the property editor is done in QML. Also the item library, you see here, is done in QML, and this is really Qt Quick. This is really the standard Qt Quick, and also the states editor is done in QML. So we really tested our technology there and ironed out lots of bugs. yeah. Any questions so far? Yeah.
So just a little question. The code you have shown before from the property editor, can you show it again, please?
Yeah, of course.
I see here this group box and layer stuff you know from normal Qt widgets. Yeah. And on the screenshot you see this collapsible groups of settings. So where does this collapsing functionality come from? This is not a normal group box.
No, that's true. That's just a special group box I wrote in C++. And if you're interested, just look on the source code of Qt Creator, and we use that instead of a normal group box. But that's basically, that is a normal group box or collapsible group box that would work in any Qt application, actually.
Okay, so that's the reason why it's called group box, not Qt group box.
Exactly. That is some invention we have there. If we have a special widget, then we don't have the Q before it.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, we still have a little bit of time left, so I want to talk a little bit about the, because I mean...
Just one more question about handling tags here.
Okay.
You directly assigned all tags to the items. How do I do this if I want to use the application for different languages?
This was... I'm not sure if I understand the question. What do you mean exactly by tags?
Text.
Ah, text.
Text.
Ah, you mean translation?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Actually, can you show that? That's a good question. I forgot that. Let's go to my super simple example here. So I drag in some text. And you see this. This is a, maybe it's not too obvious, but that's a checkbox. And if you go to the text edit, you see already that is already translatable by default. Because we think translatable is a sensible default, but you can turn it off, and now it's not translatable anymore. And then we can turn the checkbox on again, and then it's translatable again. So we find a way to basically make these not too intrusive in the UI, but still kind of discoverable. I think it's also in the documentation, I'm pretty sure, and I think that's kind of good solution. But I should have shown that before, yes. Any more questions? Okay, then since there are probably also lots of developers here, and this is called developer days and not designer days, I also want to get a little bit in the architecture of the whole thing. Just give a rough overview. The core element of the designer is something we call model, which is basically like some DOM, which represents the QML code, the QML text code in some nice abstract syntactic form. So it's more abstract than, for example, an abstract syntax tree already has a nicer API. We already also have some functions for semantics of it. So we use the code model of the text editor to get basically all kinds of information we can. So we build some mixture of a semantic and syntactic model. Then we have lots of views on that model. One view is the rewriter view, which is basically doing all the persistence. So this rewriter view is a special view and writes all the changes to QML, to the text buffer of Qt Creator, and reacts to all the changes in the text buffer of Qt Creator so that they are propagated to the model and from the model to all the views. Then we have something that's called the instance view. The instance view is basically driving the emulation layer, which is this special process called QML Puppet, but there are also some things in between. And then we have all the typical views like the form editor, the property editor, the states editor. And yeah, they work usually for actions, of course. They work on the model, but they can interrogate these emulation layers for all kind of information. Like, give me the value from the object for width, right? In the text, width is not defined, but the object has a width 20, and I want that value, right? So I can get that for the property editor. And yeah, that's it. So thank you. So. More questions? Yes.
Hi. In Qt Designer, you have a signal slot editor, Is this coming in the Qt Quick Designer also?
Yeah, that's what I talked a little bit about, because we have this extremely tight text integration, and you have the text editor with code completion, navigation. It's not on the roadmap. I mean, I know that there are some cases where it would be easier to do it with just some combo box, but I mean, usually, I mean, it's just 10 seconds in text, right, for the same thing, once you're at least a little bit used to QML. And you get lots more flexibility by that, right? So we could do add some very simple things. We plan that, for example, if we want to give the tool just to designers who want to do a mock-up, who really don't want to touch code. But then it would be really very simple stuff like, if I click here, change to the state. Or, yeah.
Okay, so I'm curious about the how you have the design view totally separated from the source editor.
You mean it's a different mode?
Yeah, exactly. So if you compare to a lot of other visual tools, you always, very often at least, you have a split view possibility to see the code at the same time as the designer, and you see the code being updated as you change in the designer. Is that something done by purpose or just technical limitation?
Let's see, not really a technical limitation, more resource limitation. The point is just that right now we know when we have to update, right, on mode change. Otherwise, we would have basically to update at some point, right? So, for example, we tried that in a prototype, and we just had the problem that we had to synchronize at some point, and this synchronization just came in the way of typing. And then we started, okay, we can do that better, but would take a lot of resources to make this really snappy, and we skipped it so far. But it's still something we have in mind.
So hi, do you have any tips and tricks for developing applications for Symbian and MeeGo using the page tag and the pages? So
yes. Actually, we played around with that, and we never had the resources to basically integrate this page tag framework. So what we always propose is just outsource any form as an item, and then you can easily use it in the editor. Or yeah, every window, any page, you can easily edit in the editor, and you can even use the refactoring operations to put it in a separate file, and then it gets pretty easy. I mean, yeah, we talked a lot about that internally, and I mean, when you have everything in one document, it gets pretty hairy, especially if you want to drag around items in the navigator already. You have so much stuff, and also supporting the page stack. I mean, yes, it would be possible. There's some initial support for that. In Qt Symbian Components 1.1, we talked to the guys and changed it a little bit, so it gets a little bit better integrated. But I mean, we added basically now this caramel bar navigation, and that makes it really easy to go into components and then edit this component and then go back. And this is basically our solution for that problem.
Okay, thanks.
No more questions? I mean, I can, for example, I mean, as you probably know, this is also part of Qt Creator, and it's also part of the Qt project, so you can contribute. So, like to normal Qt Creator code, you can contribute. So if you have bug fixes or even small features, it's the usual process for Qt Creator. You can just push it to Garrett, we can review it, we can talk about it. There's no difference from other parts of Qt Creator or Qt. Just let you know it. So we already had 1 or 2 merge requests for like basically smaller bug fixes. So that's also no problem from our side. And yeah, what I didn't show now is that, for example, also the Qt desktop components also work to some degree. For example, when you saw our welcome screen, the push buttons were already the Qt desktop components. And the integration is not perfect yet because the widgets are not ready, and actually lots of stuff is still in flux, but when they are out, we will integrate also the desktop widgets into the Qt Quick Designer. We still have time for questions. Anything specific you want me to show you or see how it works? Okay, then thank you for listening. Great that you were here.